The effects of stimulants and depressants like cigarettes, caffeine, and alcohol can have a varied impact on people living with MS. Welcome to Ask an MS Expert. I'm John Strum, your moderator and also the host of the Real Talk MS podcast. Each week, Real Talk MS reaches thousands of people in more than 100 countries around the world with the news that people affected by MS need to know. My wife, Jean, lived with progressive MS for 23 years, so I've had a front row seat experiencing all the ways that MS can impact a family. Today, I'll be asking our expert the questions you want answered. MS navigators are here throughout today's live program, answering your questions and connecting you to resources. Everyday habits like smoking, drinking alcohol, and caffeine intake might seem harmless. But for people living with MS, these choices could make a big difference in how the disease affects their mind and body. Joining us today to talk about how smoking, alcohol, and caffeine can affect MS is Dr. Barbara Giesser. Dr. Giesser is a neurologist who has specialized in caring for people living with MS for over 4 decades. And today she's the director of the MS Comprehensive Care Clinic at the Pacific Neuroscience Institute. Welcome, Dr. Giesser. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me, John.
So tell me, what does the research say about the effects of smoking on MS?
Well, in a nutshell, there is nothing good about smoking and multiple sclerosis. To begin with, smoking increases your risk of getting MS. If your mother smoked during pregnancy, the baby is at increased risk of getting MS. If a baby's father smoked during the pregnancy or even before the pregnancy, that child has an increased risk of getting MS. So we know that smoking tobacco is associated with an increased risk of developing MS. We also know that people with MS who smoke have more progression and more disability.
I want to ask you about that. How does cigarette smoking accelerate disease progression?
We think there are a number of mechanisms. To begin with, we know that MS is a disease that is characterized by inflammation, and when you smoke, that sets up inflammation and turns on the immune system. Most people have heard of the gut microbiome, which are all the microorganisms that live in our gut. We know there's a very strong connection between the gut microbiome and MS. Turns out there's also a lung microbiome that is also involved in regulating immunity, and cigarette smoke disturbs the lung microbiome as well. Furthermore, cigarette smoke itself has many toxic compounds, such as hydrogen cyanide, and these can have a direct toxic effect on brain cells. And lastly, smoking is known to accelerate other comorbidities. These are other non-MS conditions, such as hardening of the arteries, atherosclerosis, and heart disease. And we know that when people with MS have a comorbidity, such as heart disease, they tend to have worse progression as well. So there are many different mechanisms whereby smoking makes MS worse.
Well, we heard from Laurel, who tells us that she was diagnosed with MS 4 years ago, and she lives with her husband, who is a smoker. Now, he usually keeps his smoking outdoors, but sometimes Laurel says she's around. Does this pose any risk to Laurel and her MS?
Yes, we think that secondhand smoke is also not good for people with MS, so he should take it completely outside.
Carlos is in his 40s. He says he's smoked since he was a teenager. Now, his doctor has encouraged him to quit so he can better manage his MS, but Carlos is wondering if quitting now would be too little, too late.
Not at all. There is a little bit of good news in that people who have MS who smoke and stop, after they stop, their rate of progression approaches that of people who never smoked. So it's never too late to quit.
You know, so far we've been talking about smoking tobacco. And we heard from Tasha, who's curious about vaping as an alternative to smoking cigarettes. Is there any research about the effects of vaping on MS?
We don't have a lot of data about vaping, but it's thought that the chemicals in the smoke may also contribute to inflammation. Also, we don't have any data that vaping is safer than smoking cigarettes. So we, to be conservative, would advise people not to vape as well.
I'm wondering whether there are different recommendations for smoking cannabis.
The issue with cannabis is not the cannabis itself per se, it's the smoking. So if people are finding that medicinal cannabis or cannabinoid extracts are beneficial for relieving symptoms, we would encourage them to use edibles or topical oils or any non-smoking form.
Well, the research is pretty clear that it's best to avoid or stop smoking if you're living with MS. Alcohol's effects on MS seem more nuanced. How does alcohol affect the body and how does it affect MS?
That's a great way of putting it. While the data on smoking are very clear cut, alcohol seems to be a little bit of a yin yang thing. We know that in anyone, alcohol can worsen people's balance, worsen people's coordination. Many people with MS may already have these problems. We know that very high doses of alcohol can produce peripheral neuropathy, which can give rise to numbness and tingling, which are also symptoms in people with MS. And very heavy drinking of alcohol may, in fact, be neurotoxic. So there are a number of reasons why people with MS should avoid excessive consumption of alcohol.
Shayla tells us that she manages both MS and depression, and she's wondering if there are mental health implications to drinking alcohol.
Yes, in some studies, alcohol may worsen depression. Alcohol might also interfere with the actions of some antidepressants.
At one time or another, we've all seen the advisories not to drink alcohol while taking certain medications. Is there a concern about drinking alcohol while taking any of the MS disease modifying therapies?
There may be a concern for taking some of the disease modifying therapies and also some of the medications that are used for symptom management. Alcohol is primarily metabolized through our liver, and so any drug that gets metabolized through the liver, there may be a potential for interference with this.
Adam tells us that he's heard that a daily glass of red wine can have health benefits. Is there research to support this?
Well, this is where the what I call the yin yang about alcohol and MS comes in. There are studies that suggest in multiple sclerosis and also other autoimmune diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis or lupus that light to moderate alcohol consumption may actually be protective. Some studies have suggested that light to moderate alcohol consumption may actually lower the risk of these diseases. And in at least one study, light to moderate alcohol consumption in people with MS was associated with somewhat less disability, although these people had more lesions on MRI. There are definitions. Light drinking is defined as less than about 3 drinks per week. Moderate drinking would be 1 drink or less per day for women and 2 drinks or less per day for men. And heavy drinking is more than 4 drinks a day for women and more than 5 drinks a day for men. So it depends how much, but there are some data that suggest that at low to moderate doses, alcohol may possibly be anti-inflammatory. It can work on the gut microbiome to increase the production of short-chain fatty acids, which are thought to be beneficial, and it might have other beneficial effects on the gut microbiome. But we are not suggesting alcohol as a treatment for MS. We're just saying that some of the data suggests that a little bit of alcohol might not be a bad thing. Also, everybody's tolerance to alcohol is different. So if you're one of those people like me who are kind of cheap drunks, you may want to take it easy.
Noted. Well, we've discussed smoking and alcohol. That leaves us with caffeine, and that's something that I know some people with MS take to help them get through fatigue. Are there benefits of caffeine for someone who's living with MS?
Well, I think the benefits of caffeine for people with MS may be similar to benefits for people without MS, which is caffeine can certainly relieve fatigue. It can help people focus. And so there certainly may be some energy and cognitive benefit.
Of course, we can find caffeine in soft drinks, in coffee, energy drinks. It can even be found in pill form. So I'm wondering if one method of getting caffeine is better or more effective than another.
Well, I think you might want to be cautious about energy drinks in excess because, in addition to caffeine, a lot of them contain a lot of sugars. Some of them contain other chemical compounds. So, in my opinion, I think caffeine is probably preferable to be consumed in coffee or tea. Again, the problem with soft drinks is that they have a lot of sugar, and if you're drinking artificially sweetened soft drinks, we have some recent data that the artificial sweeteners are not good for people. So.
Well, Kyle tells us that he gets his caffeine by drinking a few cups of coffee throughout each day to help manage his fatigue. But there's a flip side to that. He says then he has trouble sleeping at night. Is there anything Kyle can do to avoid those sleepless nights?
Um, this would be where timing comes in. So Kyle may find that if he stops drinking coffee after perhaps 4 or 5 in the afternoon, that he doesn't have a problem with insomnia. I think it would depend on how much and when the caffeine is consumed.
Now, Emma says she has a familial history of MS, and she recently heard that drinking coffee could actually lower her risk of developing MS. She wants to know whether that's true.
There are a few studies which suggest that coffee consumption may be associated with a decreased risk of getting MS, but I don't know that we have a definitive answer for this. I'd call it a definite maybe.
Are there any negative side effects associated with caffeine for people who are living with MS?
Well, you've already mentioned one, which is it might cause insomnia if taken too late in the day, which could certainly increase fatigue, which is a problem for many people with MS. Caffeine also acts as a little bit of a diuretic, and it may increase urgency and frequency with going to the bathroom. Lastly, caffeine may make some people jittery or cause a little bit of a rapid heartbeat. So I think every individual has to see what their own particular tolerance for the caffeine is.
Well, Sarita says she can't go a day without her coffee. Is developing caffeine dependence a concern for people living with MS?
I don't think being dependent on caffeine is more of a problem for somebody with MS than for somebody without MS. Certainly, caffeine withdrawal in anybody may produce fatigue or irritability or headaches. So I think it's a question of knowing how much you can tolerate or not tolerate.
Well, you've shared some important insights about the effects of smoking, alcohol, and caffeine on MS. What would you say is the top takeaway that you'd like our viewers to remember and to use?
Well, I think the main takeaway is that lifestyle choices are important for people with multiple sclerosis, and it's something they have a lot of control over. In terms of smoking, do not smoke. And if you don't smoke, don't start. And if you smoke, stop. There are benefits even after you stopped smoking. I think caffeine can be useful as a stimulant or to help people focus. There may be a few side effects such as urinary urgency or insomnia. And in terms of alcohol, I think moderation is the key and knowing what your own individual tolerance is.
Thank you for being with us today, Dr. Giesser.
Always a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for inviting me, John.
Today's program survey has now been posted in the chat for your feedback. Please take a minute and complete it to help us create programs and topics with you in mind. Please be sure to visit the National MS Society's website for information and resources on MS, connection opportunities, and ways for you to get involved. You can also connect with an MS Navigator to receive personalized support by phone, email, or through the Society's website by chat. A recording of today's program will be posted on the MS Society's website at nationalmssociety.org/MSexpert, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. Finally, I'll invite you to join me each week on the Real Talk MS podcast, where we continue the conversation that we start here. You can find Real Talk MS on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Thanks for joining us for Ask an MS Expert. We'll see you next week.